Imagine looking into your mother's eyes, the woman who is supposed to be your protector, your sanctuary, and realizing that to her, you are nothing more than an ungrateful inconvenience standing in the way of her happiness. It's a cold, soul-crushing realization that changes the way you see the world forever. I asked her one question, just one, and in that moment, the fragile glass house we'd been living in for 5 years didn't just crack, it shattered into a million jagged pieces. Now, I'm staring at a plane ticket to my brother's wedding in Cancun, realizing I'm supposed to share a hotel room with the woman who chose a predator over her own child. How do you sit across from someone who watched your world burn and then blamed you for the smoke? How do you keep the peace at a wedding when your entire life has been a war zone? To understand why that one question broke us, you have to understand the girl I was before everything went dark. I'm 21 now, but if I close my eyes, I can still see the 12-year-old version of me. I was a kid who just wanted to belong. I grew up without a father, a void that stayed quiet most days but roared on others. My mum was my everything, but our relationship was always complicated. She had this way of making you feel like you were walking on eggshells, even when the floor was carpeted. She had a pattern, a rhythm to her life that involved talking badly about everyone else in the family, pushing people away, and then playing the victim when she found herself alone. But back then, I didn't see the red flags. I just saw a woman who deserved to be loved. When I was 12, she met a guy online. Let's call him Mark. Mark lived in another city a few hours away, which, in hindsight, was probably the only reason they lasted as long as they did. Distance has a way of masking the rot in a person's character. When she told me about him, I remember feeling this rush of relief. I thought, finally, she'll be happy. Maybe she'll stop being so angry at the world if someone is holding her hand. I welcomed him with open arms. I wanted him to be the father figure I never had. I wanted the backyard barbecues, the awkward advice, the feeling of a complete family. I played my part perfectly. I was the supportive daughter, the one who smiled when he came over, the one who didn't complain when his presence took up all of my mother's attention. Fast forward to when I was 16. It was 2020, the year the world stopped. We were all trapped inside, and like every other teenager with too much time and a Pinterest account, I fell down the rabbit hole of aesthetic art. I was obsessed with anything sparkly, anything that looked like it belonged in a neon-lit dreamscape. One afternoon, I decided to paint a mini canvas. I found a reference image of the Playboy bunny, this sleek, minimalist logo that I'd seen on trendy hoodies and posters all over social media. To me, it wasn't a symbol of an adult empire. It was just a cool, edgy design that looked good with a glittery background. I was 16, shouted in some ways and naive in others. I finished the painting and proudly hung it on my bedroom wall, a small square of my own creativity in a world that felt increasingly small. Then came the day that changed the trajectory of my life. My mum wasn't home. She was out running errands or working. I can't remember which. The house was quiet, that heavy, stagnant silence that only comes with a lockdown. Suddenly, the front door opened. It was Mark. He wasn't supposed to be there. He lived hours away and usually only came by when my mum was there to host him. But there he was, standing in our living room, looking around like he owned the place. I was in my room, trying to keep busy, when he knocked and walked in. At first, it was just the usual small talk. How's school? What are you working on? But the energy in the room shifted the second his eyes landed on that mini canvas. He pointed to the Playboy bunny, and his voice went from casual to something sharper, something darker. Do you know what that means? He asked. I shrugged, feeling a sudden prickle of heat on the back of my neck. It's just art, I said. I like the way it looks. I didn't know how to set a boundary with a man who was supposed to be a parent. I felt like a deer caught in headlights, so I did the only thing I could think of. I answered. I gave him short, clipped no's and I don't knows. hoping that if I just went along with the conversation, he would leave. But he didn't leave. Instead, he smiled, that oily, paternal smile that still makes my stomach churn, and told me he was glad he could be a father figure to me. He said he wanted to be someone I could talk to about real things. Then he asked for a hug. I didn't want to hug him. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to lock the door, to call my mum. But I was a good girl. I didn't want to be rude. I stood up and leaned in for a quick, awkward hug, expecting it to last 2 seconds. It didn't. As I leaned in, he didn't just hug me back. He grabbed me. He pulled me down onto the bed with him, pulling me on top of him as he laid back. The air left my lungs. The weight of him, the feeling of being trapped against a man who was supposed to protect me, sent a wave of pure, cold adrenaline through my veins. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just scrambled. I pushed off him, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and I ran. I didn't look back. I flew down the stairs, my breath coming in jagged gasps, just as the front door opened again. It was my mum. She saw me standing there, shaking, tears already streaming down my face. She saw Mark coming down the stairs behind me, his face a mask of feigned confusion. Before I could even get a word out, he jumped in. "I don't know what's wrong with her," he said, his voice smooth and concerned. "She just started acting crazy." "I need to go," I sobbed. "I need to go to a friend's house. Please, let me go." My mum didn't ask what happened. She didn't pull me aside. She got angry. She told me I was grounded, that I wasn't going anywhere, and that I was being dramatic. She looked at me with this expression of pure annoyance, like my breakdown was a personal insult to her afternoon. I felt the world tilting. I realized then that she wasn't looking at a daughter in pain. She was looking at a hurdle. I couldn't stay in that house. I called my older brother, my voice cracking as I begged him to help me. He was the only one who could get through to her. After a heated phone call between them, she finally relented, waving her hand at me like she was dismissing a stray dog. "Fine, go, whatever." I spent that night at my friend's house, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I had been branded. I thought that once Mark left the next day, things would be different. I thought that once we were alone, I could tell her the truth and she would hold me. I thought she would protect me. I was wrong. The next morning, after he had driven back to his city, I sat her down. I told her everything. The questions, the bed, the way he looked at me. I bared my soul to her. I expected outrage. I expected her to pick up the phone and end it. I expected her to be my mother. Instead, she looked at me with cold, dead eyes and told me she didn't believe me. She told me I was making it up for attention. She told me I was jealous of her relationship. And then she did the one thing I never thought she'd do. She kept seeing him. That was the moment the ground truly fell away from beneath my feet. There is a specific kind of silence that follows a betrayal like that. A ringing in your ears that never quite goes away. My mother, the woman who had raised me alone, looked at her 16-year-old daughter, shaking, crying, recounting a violation of the most basic trust. And she chose a man she'd met on the internet. She didn't just choose him, she defended him. She told me I was the problem. She told me I was troubled and imaginative in the worst possible way. And then life just went back to normal. Or at least her version of normal. Mark kept coming over. He would walk through our front door with a bag of groceries or a gift for her, and he'd look at me with this sickening, triumphant glint in his eyes. He knew. He knew he'd won. He'd tested the fences, found the weakness in my mother's armor, and realized he could do whatever he wanted because she would never believe me. I had to sit at the dinner table with him. I had to hear him laugh. I had to walk past him in the hallway, pressing my back against the wall so our clothes wouldn't touch. while my mother smiled at him from the kitchen. The gaslighting was a slow-acting poison. When the person who is supposed to be your moral compass tells you that your reality is a lie, you start to break. You start to wonder if you are crazy. Maybe I misread the situation? Maybe he didn't mean it like that? But then I'd remember the weight of him on that bed, the way the air felt like it was being squeezed out of my lungs, and the truth would roar back. The conflict between what I knew and what I was being told to believe was too much for a 16-year-old brain to handle. I needed to numb the noise. I needed to turn off the screaming in my head that started every time I heard his car pull into the driveway. It started small, stealing a few of my mum's pills, finding a way to get high just so I could sleep without dreaming of his hands on my shoulders. But the numbness is addictive. When your life is a constant state of hypervigilance, the feeling of finally being checked out is the only thing that feels like peace. Before I knew it, I wasn't just a troubled teen anymore. I was an addict. I was spiraling, and I was doing it in plain sight. But my mum didn't see it as a cry for help. To her, it was just more evidence that I was the bad kid. I was the one making her life difficult. I was the one ruining her perfect little setup with Mark. The next few years are a blur of dark rooms, cold sweats, and the crushing weight of disappointment. I got kicked out for the first time when I was 18. She didn't even cry when she told me to leave. She just looked at me with that same cold, detached expression she'd used when I told her about Mark. I was a liability to her happiness, and she was done with me. I went to rehab. I tried. God, I tried so hard to get clean, to find some version of myself that wasn't covered in the soot of my childhood. But every time I looked at my phone and saw a missed call from my brother, or a photo of my mum and Mark together at a family gathering, the urge to disappear came back. I relapsed. I fell back into the same holes I'd spent months climbing out of. I was living on the edge, bouncing between couches and cheap motels, feeling like a ghost in my own life. Eventually, I hit the bottom. I got kicked out of where I was staying again, and I had nowhere left to go. No one would take me in, except for my aunt. My aunt saw the girl I used to be. She didn't look at me like I was a burden or a liar. She looked at me like I was a person who had been broken by people who were supposed to keep me whole. In 2023, she opened her doors to me, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of safety. I've been sober ever since. It's been the hardest work I've ever done. Every single day is a battle against the urge to numb the past. But I'm doing it. I'm living with my cousins now, holding down a job, trying to build a future out of the wreckage. But the shadow of my mother is always there. She lives 30 minutes away. Half an hour. That's all that separates us. And yet she barely exists in my world. She doesn't call to check if I'm still sober. She doesn't ask how I'm doing. She reached out a handful of times, but it was never to apologize. It was always about her life, her drama, her problems. You see, my mom has a gift. She can turn any situation into a story where she is the long-suffering martyr. Growing up, I watched her systematically dismantle every relationship she had. She'd talk behind her sisters' backs, pick fights with her brothers, and push away anyone who dared to hold her accountable. She lives in a world where everyone is out to get her. It's a lonely way to live, but for her, it's easier than looking in the mirror. A few months ago, she decided to take a trip to Mexico with some family members, including my uncle. I wasn't there, but the stories that came back were chaotic. Apparently there was a massive blowout. My mum and my uncle got into a screaming match, the kind of ugly, deep-seated family fight that has years of resentment fueling it. In the heat of the moment, things got physical. My uncle grabbed her arm to get her to listen, and when she didn't stop, he slapped her. Now let me be clear. I don't condone that. At all. Violence isn't the answer, and my uncle shouldn't have put his hands on her. But knowing my mother, I knew she wouldn't just walk away. She went to the police. She filed a full report against her own brother. She wanted him to pay. She wanted the world to see her as the victim of a terrible crime. When she came back, she showed up at my house. I was sitting in the living room with my cousins when she walked in, looking like she'd survived a war. She launched into this long, dramatic retelling of the assault. She talked about how traumatized she was, how she couldn't believe her own flesh and blood would hurt her like that, how she was going to make sure he faced the consequences. I sat there, listening to her talk about justice. I listened to her talk about the sanctity of a woman's body and how nobody has the right to touch you without your permission. I felt this heat starting in my chest, a slow, burning fire that had been smouldering for 5 years. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw the hypocrisy dripping off her like oil. She was so quick to call the police on her brother for a slap. She was so quick to seek justice when it was her own pride that had been wounded. But where was that energy when it was me? Where were the police reports when her daughter was being cornered in her own bedroom? I didn't plan to say it. The words just bubbled up before I could stop them. "Why did you file a police report on your brother?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "But not on the man who tried to molest me." The room went dead silent. My cousins froze. My mother's mouth, which had been mid-sentence, snapped shut. For a second, just 1 second, I saw something in her eyes. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't remorse. It was pure, unadulterated shock that I had dared to break the unspoken rule of our family. Never speak the truth if it makes her look bad. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally whispered, her voice trembling with fake indignation. "You never told me that." I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat, a bitter, jagged sound. "I told you the next morning, Mum. I told you everything. And you told me I was a liar." She didn't stay to argue. She didn't try to explain. She just grabbed her bag and walked out. By the time I checked my phone 10 minutes later, she had blocked me on everything. No more calls, no more texts, just a digital wall. But here's the kicker. She didn't block anyone else. She's still talking to the rest of the family, still playing the victim, still telling her version of the Mexico story to anyone who will listen. And she's still with Mark. 5 years later, he's still the man by her side. And now, the real nightmare begins. My older brother, the one who helped me get out that night, is getting married. It's a destination wedding in Cancun this coming May. Months ago, before the question happened, we were trying to save money because travel is expensive. My mum, my boyfriend and I all agreed to book one big suite together to split the cost. The reservation is made, the money is paid, and now I'm stuck. I'm supposed to fly to a tropical paradise to celebrate my brother's happiness, but I'm going to be trapped in a hotel room with the woman who blocked me because I reminded her of her own failures. I'm going to be in the same space as the man who stole my sense of safety. How am I supposed to do this? How do I walk down a beach in a bridesmaid dress and pretend the world isn't screaming? The silence that followed that conversation was different from any silence I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the quiet of a room after a TV is turned off. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a grave. When I saw that user not found message on my screen, a part of me, a small, hopeful, childish part of me, finally died. For years I had held on to this tiny flicker of a dream that one day she'd wake up. I imagined her coming to me, tears in her eyes, saying, "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. I'm so sorry I chose him." But when she hit that block button, she wasn't just blocking my phone number. She was blocking the truth. She was deleting the version of reality where she failed as a mother. My cousins, who had been sitting right there in the living room, were shell-shocked. They'd heard the stories, of course. They knew I'd had a rough few years, but they'd never heard me lay it out like that. They'd never seen the mask slip off my mother's face so completely. One of them, Sarah, just stared at the door where my mum had disappeared. She looked at me, her eyes wide, and whispered, "Did you really tell her back then?" "Every word," I said. My voice was hollow. I didn't feel the rush of victory I thought I would. I just felt tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion that felt like it was settled in my marrow. I told her everything, and she told me I was a liar. The next few days were a blur of nervous energy. I expected a call from my brother, or maybe a frantic text from an aunt trying to mediate. But the silence persisted. My mum was playing a masterstroke of emotional manipulation. She was acting like I didn't exist, while simultaneously leaning on the rest of the family for support after my vicious attack on her. I started hearing whispers through the grapevine. She was telling people I'd lost my mind, that my past drug use had fried my brain, and that I was hallucinating things that happened years ago just to hurt her. It's a special kind of hell when the person who birthed you uses your lowest moments they helped create, as a weapon to discredit your trauma. She was weaponizing my recovery against me. She was telling the family, "See, she's still unstable. You can't believe a word she says." And because she's charismatic, and because she's the one who shows up to the family dinners with a smile and a bottle of wine, people wanted to believe her. It's easier to believe a daughter is crazy than to believe a mother is a monster who stood by while her child was targeted. But then there was the wedding. My brother's wedding isn't just a party. It's the biggest event our family has had in a decade. He's the success story. He stayed out of the drama, he worked hard, and he found a woman who is genuinely kind. They deserve the world. And because Cancun is expensive, we had all made this logical financial decision months ago. 1 suite, 2 bedrooms, shared living space. It was supposed to be me, my current boyfriend, who has been my rock through my sobriety, my mum, and Mark. The thought of it makes my skin crawl. I can't close my eyes without seeing that hotel room. I see the white sand, the blue water, and then I see the 4 of us trapped in a space where there's nowhere to hide. I think about sharing a breakfast table with the man who laid back on my bed and pulled me onto him. I think about my mother pretending everything is fine while she avoids my gaze. My boyfriend Leo is furious. He's seen me at my worst. He's held me through the nightmares and the panic attacks that still hit me when I see someone who looks like Mark from a distance. When I told him what happened with the police report and the block, he wanted to call her himself. He wanted to scream at her until she understood the gravity of what she'd done. But I stopped him. You can't scream sense into someone who is committed to being deaf. "We aren't staying in that room," Leo said, his jaw set. "I don't care if we have to sleep on the beach. I am not letting you be in a confined space with that man and a woman who won't protect you." But it's not that simple. We already paid our portion. Thousands of dollars that we saved up from my entry-level job and his shifts at the warehouse. Money that represented our freedom, our growth. If we cancel or try to get a different room now, we lose that money, and we might not even be able to find another place to stay. The resort is fully booked for the wedding party. And then there's my brother. I called him a few days after the fallout. I could hear the stress in his voice before he even said hello. He's caught in the impossible middle. He knows I'm not lying. He was there that night. He saw me shaking and sobbing. He was the one who fought our mum to let me leave. But he's also his mother's son. He wants his wedding to be perfect. He wants the pictures to show a happy, united family. "I just need everyone to get along for 4 days, he told me, his voice sounding small. "Can you just ignore her? Can you just stay on your side of the room and pretend he's not there? For me?" It felt like a physical blow. For me. The 2 most dangerous words in a dysfunctional family. They are the words that ask you to set yourself on fire to keep everyone else warm. He wasn't asking my mum to apologise. He wasn't asking Mark not to come. He was asking me, the victim, to carry the burden of silence one more time so that the vibe wouldn't be ruined. I sat on my bed after that call and looked at my old art supplies. I thought about that 16-year-old girl who just wanted to paint something pretty. I realized that for 5 years, I had been the one making the sacrifices. I was the one who went to rehab. I was the one who lost my home. I was the one who clawed my way back to sanity, while they stayed exactly the same. They haven't grown. They haven't changed. They are still the same people who watched a girl drown and complained about the splash. I started scrolling through my phone, looking at the photos of my uncle's bruised arm from the Mexico trip, the ones my mum had circulated to prove his violence. I looked at her police report, which she'd proudly sent to the family group chat before she blocked me. She wanted justice for a slap. She wanted the law to intervene because someone touched her without her permission. The irony is so thick it's sickening. She understands consent when it applies to her. She understands the role of the police when she's the one who was wronged. She just doesn't think those rules apply to me. To her, I am an extension of her, not a separate human being with my own rights. In her mind, if she chooses to ignore what Mark did, then it effectively never happened. I'm now at a crossroads, and every path looks like it's covered in broken glass. If I go to the wedding and stay in that room, I am essentially telling my mother that her behaviour is acceptable. I am telling Mark that he can continue to exist in my space without consequence. I am putting my sobriety and my mental health at risk for the sake of a perfect wedding photo. But if I don't go? Or if I cause a scene and demand a different room, I become the villain again. I become the sister who ruined the wedding. I become the unstable daughter who couldn't put her drama aside for one weekend. I found myself looking at the plane ticket confirmation on my laptop. Departure, May 12th. Destination, Cancun. It felt less like a vacation and more like a sentencing. I thought about the question I asked her. Why did you file a police report on your brother, but not on the man who tried to molest me? I don't regret asking it, not for a second. It was the most honest thing I've said in 5 years. But the fallout has shown me something I wasn't ready to face. My mother doesn't just lack the ability to protect me. She lacks the desire to. And as I prepare for this trip, I have to figure out how to protect myself, because it's clear that no one else is coming to save me. The weeks leading up to the wedding felt like a slow-motion car crash. You know that feeling when you're watching something terrible about to happen and you want to look away, but your eyes are glued to the wreckage. That was my life. I was still blocked. Every time I accidentally tapped on my mum's profile in my contacts, that greyed-out, no bio screen stared back at me like a tombstone. It was a constant digital reminder that in her world, I was dead. I was a non-entity because I had dared to hold up a mirror to her hypocrisy. But the rest of the family? They were buzzing. The family group chat, the one I was still in, though I mostly just lurked like a ghost, was filled with flight itineraries, dress fittings, and excitement about the open bar. My mum was the star of the show. She was posting photos of her wedding guest outfits, asking for opinions on jewellery, and acting like the perfect doting mother of the groom. Watching her perform was nauseating. It was like watching a play where everyone knew the lead actress was a liar, but they all clapped anyway because they didn't want to ruin the show. I tried to stay focused on my sobriety. My sponsor told me that resentment is the #1 offender, the thing that most often leads to a relapse. I spent hours in meetings just trying to keep my head above water. I had worked so hard for my peace. I had spent a year building a life where I didn't wake up wanting to disappear. And now, the very person who had handed me the matches to burn my life down was inviting me to sit by the fire with her in Mexico. Leo was my anchor. He'd come home from work, see me staring at the wall, and just pull me into a hug. He didn't try to give me fix-it advice. He just stayed there. But even his patience was wearing thin. He hated Mark with a visceral, protective intensity, If he so much as breathes in your direction, Leo told me one night while we were packing, we are leaving. I don't care if we have to hitchhike back from Cancun. We are gone. But the financial reality was a cage. We had put down nearly $3,000 for this trip, money we'd scraped together from overtime shifts and skipped meals. To cancel now would mean losing it all. To book a different room at the same resort would cost another $2,000, and the hotel was already sold out. We were trapped by our own bank accounts. It's funny how people say money can't buy happiness, but it can certainly buy safety. And right then, we were too broke to be safe. I decided to call my brother's fiancée, Elena. I hadn't talked to her much since the fallout, mostly because I didn't want to taint her wedding planning with my baggage. But I needed to know if she knew. I needed to know if I was walking into an ambush. "Hey, Eleanor," I said when she picked up. I just wanted to check in about the room." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear the sound of wind. She was probably outside, taking a break from the chaos. "Oh, honey," she sighed. "David told me what happened. I'm so sorry, I really am." "Did he tell you why?" I asked. I wanted to hear her say it. "He said you and your mum had a big fight about the past," she said carefully. "He didn't give me all the details, but he's really stressed and he just wants everyone to be okay for the weekend. Your mum told him she's ready to be the bigger person and that she won't start anything." The bigger person. The phrase felt like acid in my ears. The bigger person isn't the one who ignores a predator. The bigger person is the one who protects their child. My mum was playing the role of the saintly, forgiving mother who was willing to tolerate her troubled daughter for the sake of the wedding. It was a brilliant move. It made me the potential aggressor. If I reacted to her presence, I was the one starting things. If I looked uncomfortable around Mark, I was the one being dramatic. "Elena," I said, my voice trembling, "it's not just a fight. She's bringing the man who did things to me. He's going to be in the suite. He's going to be sleeping in the next room." The silence on the other end was deafening. "I didn't know that part," she whispered. "David didn't tell me that." "He doesn't want to think about it," I said. "None of them do. It's easier for them to believe I'm just difficult than to admit they're inviting a monster to their wedding." Elena was kind, but she was also a bride 3 weeks away from her big day. She offered me words of comfort, told me she'd try to keep us busy with wedding activities so we wouldn't have to spend much time in the room. But she couldn't change the reservation. She couldn't kick my mum out. The power dynamic was firmly in my mother's favour because she was the one who had helped pay for the larger suite in the first place. As May approached, the anxiety became physical. I stopped eating. I couldn't sleep for more than 3 hours at a time without waking up in a cold sweat, dreaming of that mini canvas painting and the weight of a man on my back. I felt like I was 16 again, trapped in a house where no one heard my screams. The day of the flight arrived like a funeral march. Leo and I got to the airport early, hoping to avoid seeing them at the gate. But, of course, luck wasn't on our side. As we were sitting near the boarding area, I heard that laugh. That high-pitched, performative laugh my mother uses when she wants everyone to know she's having a great time. I looked up, and there she was. She looked stunning, tan, glowing, wearing an expensive-looking linen travel set. And right beside her, holding her carry-on bag, was Mark. He looked exactly the same. A little older, maybe, but he had that same smug, self-satisfied expression. When his eyes met mine, he didn't look away. He didn't look guilty. He gave me a small, tight nod, as if we were just old acquaintances. My stomach did a somersault. I felt the bile rise in my throat. My mum didn't even acknowledge me. She walked right past our seats, talking loudly to a cousin who was travelling with them, acting like Leo and I were just part of the airport furniture. She was committed to the bit. The block wasn't just on her phone. It was in real life. The flight was a 4-hour exercise in torture. They were seated just a few rows behind us. Every time I heard Mark's voice or my mum's laugh, my skin felt like it was crawling with insects. Leo held my hand the entire time, his grip so tight his knuckles were white. He was watching them in the reflection of the overhead monitors, his body coiled like a spring. When we landed in Cancun, the heat hit me like a physical wall. The humidity was thick, smelling of salt and jet fuel. We gathered our luggage in a tense, awkward silence. My brother was there to meet us at the airport, looking exhausted but trying to put on a brave face. He hugged me, and for a second, I felt like I could breathe. "Glad you made it," he whispered. "Please, just for me. 4 days." I nodded, but I felt like a liar. I didn't know if I could give him 4 days. I didn't know if I could give him 4 minutes. We got to the resort and it was beautiful. The kind of place people dream about. Palm trees, crystal clear pools, white sand as far as the eye could see. But as we walked into the lobby to check into our suite, the reality of the situation came crashing down. The suite was huge. It had a shared living area with a kitchenette, a balcony overlooking the ocean, and 2 separate bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. On paper, it was luxury. To me, it was a prison. My mom walked in first, tossing her sun hat onto the granite counter. "Oh, it's gorgeous," she exclaimed, still not looking at me. She turned to Mark and smiled. "We should grab some drinks and head to the pool immediately." Mark nodded, his eyes scanning the room. He looked at the door to the bedroom Leo and I were supposed to stay in, then looked back at me. A slow, creeping smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly how much power he had. "Looking forward to a great weekend," he said, his voice smooth and oily. I stood in the middle of that beautiful room, surrounded by my family, and I had never felt more alone in my entire life. I looked at the door to our bedroom, then at my mother, who was already busy unpacking her beach bag, humming a tune like she didn't have a care in the world. She had won the first round. She had successfully forced me into a space with my abuser, and she had done it with a smile on her face. Now, I had to decide. Do I play the part of the quiet, compliant daughter, or do I finally set the whole thing on fire? The first thing I did when I got into our bedroom was lock the door. I didn't even care how it looked. I just needed to hear that click. Leo dropped our bags on the floor and walked over to me, pulling me into a hug that felt like the only solid thing in a world made of smoke. I could hear them through the wall, the muffled sound of my mother's laughter and the low, rumbling vibration of Mark's voice. It was a sensory nightmare. The resort was supposed to be a dream, but all I could smell was the faint, cloying scent of the expensive sunscreen my mom used, a smell that had always been associated with her perfect days, the days when she was too busy being happy to notice I was drowning. "We stay in here as much as possible," Leo whispered into my hair. "We only go out for the official wedding stuff. We eat at the restaurants, not in this kitchenette. We don't give them a single second of our time." I nodded, but my heart was doing that frantic, erratic dance again. I felt like a fugitive in a 5-star hotel. Every time I had to leave the room to go to the bathroom or grab a bottle of water, I felt my muscles tighten, preparing for a blow that never quite landed. My mum was committed to the silent treatment in the most public way possible. When we were in the shared living area of the suite, she would walk right past me to ask Leo if he wanted a drink, or she'd talk to Mark about the schedule for the rehearsal dinner, as if I were a piece of furniture. It was a calculated, surgical kind of cruelty. She wasn't just ignoring me, she was showing me exactly how easy it was for her to replace me. That evening was the welcome drinks by the infinity pool. Everyone was dressed in tropical colours, bright corals, seafoam greens, crisp whites. The sun was setting, turning the sky into a bruised purple and gold. It was objectively beautiful. But as I stood there with a club soda and lime, watching my mother hold court with her sisters and cousins, I felt like a ghost. She was telling the story of her ordeal in Mexico again. I caught fragments of it over the sound of the waves. And he just grabbed me, right there in the middle of the street. I had no choice but to call the police. A woman has to stand up for herself, you know? The irony was a physical weight in my chest. She was standing there, receiving head nods of sympathy from her sisters, while the man who had actually violated her daughter stood 3 feet away, sipping a beer and smiling at the groom. I looked at my aunts, women I had known my whole life, and I wondered, do they know? Do they just not care? Or has she spun the story so well that they actually believe I'm the villain? One of my aunts, Aunt Janice, eventually wandered over to me. She was the one who always tried to be the peacemaker, the one who sent thinking of you cards, but never actually stood up to my mum. "It's a beautiful wedding, isn't it?" she said, looking out at the ocean. She didn't look at me directly. "Your brother is so happy. It's nice that we can all be here, together, despite everything." "Everything?" I asked, my voice flat. "What does everything mean, Janice?" She winced, her eyes darting toward my mother. "You know, the family tension. Your mum is very hurt, you know. She feels like you attacked her character right after she'd been through a trauma of her own. She says you brought up things from years ago just to overshadow her." "I brought up the truth," I said, my grip tightening on my glass. "I brought up the fact that she's protecting a predator while demanding justice for a slap. Don't you see how insane that is?" Janice sighed, that long, weary sound of someone who has decided that peace is more important than truth. "Families are complicated, honey. People remember things differently. Your mum says you were going through a lot back then, with the drugs and everything. She thinks your memory might be a bit clouded." There it was, the ultimate weapon. Because I had struggled with addiction, a struggle that was a direct result of the trauma they were now denying, my entire reality was being dismissed. They had created the cycle, and now they were using the cycle to keep me trapped. I felt a surge of that old, familiar rage, the kind that makes you want to scream until your throat bleeds. But I didn't. I took a sip of my club soda and looked her right in the eye. "I'm sober now, Janice. My head is clearer than it's ever been, and I remember exactly what happened on that bed. I remember exactly what she said to me the next morning. If you choose to believe the lie because it makes the wedding photos look better, that's on you. But don't you dare tell me my memory is clouded." I walked away before she could respond, my heels clicking sharply on the stone tiles. I found Leo by the bar and I told him I needed to leave. We skipped the rest of the party and went back to the room. But the safety of the suite was gone. As we walked through the shared living area to get to our bedroom, Mark was there. He was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, a glass of bourbon on the side table. My mum wasn't back yet. She was still at the pool, basking in the attention. It was just us. I tried to walk past him, my eyes fixed on our bedroom door. But he spoke. "You're making a lot of trouble for your brother," he said. His voice was low, devoid of the fatherly warmth he used when others were around. I stopped. I shouldn't have, but I did. Leo took a step forward, his chest puffing out, but I put a hand on his arm. I wanted to hear this. "I'm not the one making trouble," I said, turning to face him. "The trouble started 5 years ago when you put your hands on me." Mark laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. He stood up, and for a second the height difference made me feel like that 16-year-old girl again. He leaned in just a little, close enough that I could smell the bourbon on his breath. "Nobody believes you," he whispered. "Not your mum, not your aunts, not even your brother, really. He just wants you to shut up so he can have his big day. You're the junkie daughter. That's your role. And the more you talk, the more you just prove them right." Leo moved then. He didn't hit him. He knew that would get us kicked out and ruin everything. But he got right in Mark's face, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Get away from her. Now. If you speak to her again, If you even look at her, I don't care who's getting married. I will end this vacation for you." Mark held up his hands in a mock gesture of surrender, a smug grin plastered on his face. "Easy there, big guy, just talking. We're all family here, right?" He picked up his drink and sauntered off toward the other bedroom, whistling a tune. I was shaking, not from fear this time, but from the sheer, staggering weight of the injustice. He was right. That was the most painful part. In the eyes of this family, I was the junkie daughter, and he was the long-suffering partner. The truth didn't matter because the truth was ugly, and these people lived for the beautiful surface. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the balcony of our room, watching the ocean. I thought about the question I'd asked my mum. I realised that I hadn't asked it to overshadow her. I'd asked it because I was desperate to know if there was any part of her that still loved me more than she loved her own ego. The answer was a deafening no. The wedding was the next day, the main event, the reason we were all trapped in this gilded cage. I sat there in the dark, the humid air sticking to my skin, and I realised that I was grieving. I wasn't just grieving the relationship I'd lost with my mother. I was grieving the person I might have been if she had just said, "I believe you." I would have never gone down that path. I would have never known the inside of a rehab facility. I would have been a different person. But as the sun began to peek over the horizon, casting a pale pink light over the Caribbean, I felt a new kind of resolve. I had spent years letting them define me. I had let their silence drive me to needles and pills. But I was sober now. I was standing on my own 2 feet, and if they wanted a perfect wedding, they could have it. But I wasn't going to be a prop in their play anymore. I looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully in the bed behind me, and I realised that he was my family. My aunt, my cousins, the ones who actually supported my recovery. They were my family. My mother and Mark? They were just ghosts from a past life that I was finally ready to leave behind. But first, I had to get through the ceremony. I had to watch her walk down the aisle in her mother-of-the-groom dress, knowing the rot that lay beneath the silk. I had to stand there and smile for the photographer. And I had to find a way to do it without losing my mind. I didn't know then that the biggest explosion wasn't the one I'd already had with my mum. It was the one that was coming at the reception. The moment when the secrets of this family would finally be dragged into the light, whether they were ready for it or not. The sun rose on the day of my brother's wedding, like it didn't care about the war happening inside Suite 402. It was a cruel, perfect morning. The Caribbean Sea was a sheet of turquoise glass, and the air was thick with the scent of blooming hibiscus and salt. In any other life, this would have been the happiest day of my year. I was a bridesmaid. My brother, the man who had quite literally saved my life that night 5 years ago, was finally getting his happily ever after. But as I sat on the edge of the bed in our locked room, listening to the professional makeup artist arrive in the living area, I felt like I was prepping for a funeral. "Good morning, everyone," I heard my mother chirp. Her voice had that specific, high-pitched customer service tone she used when she wanted to impress strangers. "I'm the mother of the groom. We need to look spectacular today. It's a big day for my son." I looked at Leo. He was already dressed in his suit trousers, sitting in a chair by the window, watching the door like a bodyguard. He didn't have to say anything. We both knew the drill. Get in, stay quiet, get out. I had to leave the bedroom eventually. I had to get my hair and makeup done with the rest of the bridal party. When I finally unlocked the door and stepped out, the living room was a chaotic mess of curling irons, champagne flutes, and garment bags. My mum was already in the makeup chair, her eyes closed as a woman applied gold shimmer to her lids. Mark was standing by the kitchenette, wearing a silk robe, nursing a coffee, and watching the scene with a proprietary smirk. I walked toward the vanity area, keeping my head down. "Oh, look who's finally awake," my mother said, not opening her eyes. "I thought you might sleep through the whole thing, considering you're History. The room went quiet. The makeup artist paused, her brush hovering over my mother's cheek. My cousins, who were getting their hair curled, looked away, suddenly very interested in their phones. It was a classic mom move, a subtle, jagged little dig disguised as a casual observation. She was reminding everyone in the room that I was the unreliable one. "I'm here, Mum," I said, my voice as cold as the marble floor. I sat in the chair next to her. For the next hour, we sat inches apart, and she didn't say a single word to me. She talked to the stylist about her stressful year. She talked about her bravery in dealing with the family drama after the Mexico incident. She talked about Mark like he was a saint. She performed the role of the tragic, resilient heroine for an audience of stylists and distant cousins, all while I sat right there, the living, breathing evidence of her greatest failure. The ceremony was held on the beach at sunset. It was, quite honestly, the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. David stood at the altar, looking like a man who had finally found peace. When Elena walked down the aisle, the way he looked at her, it made my chest ache. That was the kind of love I wanted. The kind of love that sees the worst parts of you and says, "I'm staying." But then, my eyes drifted to the front row. My mother was weeping, the big, theatrical tears of a proud parent. Mark was beside her, his hand resting firmly on her shoulder. To the rest of the guests, they looked like the picture of a stable, middle-aged couple. It made me feel physically ill. I looked at the back of Mark's hand, the same hand that had gripped my arm 5 years ago, and I had to look away. I stared at the horizon, focusing on the rhythm of the waves, repeating my sobriety mantras in my head. One day at a time, 1 hour at a time, one breath at a time. "I do," David said. "I do," Elena echoed. The crowd erupted in cheers as they kissed. For a fleeting second, the darkness lifted. I was so happy for him, I really was. I wanted him to have everything our childhood had lacked. I wanted his home to be a place where doors weren't slammed and truths weren't buried. But as the ceremony ended and the guests began to migrate toward the reception area, the real challenge began. The reception was where the open bar lived. In the world of recovery, an open bar at a high-stress family event is like walking through a minefield with a blindfold on. The reception was held under a massive white canopy, decorated with thousands of fairy lights that looked like stars. The music was loud, a mix of calypso and top 40, and the champagne was flowing before people even sat down. Leo and I found our table. We were, of course, seated at the family table. This meant I was sitting directly across from my mother and Mark. My brother and Eleanor were at the sweetheart table, blissfully unaware of the tension vibrating through our seating arrangement. "Can I get you a drink, dear?" a waiter asked, leaning over me with a tray of signature cocktails. Something pink and sugary with a high-proof rum. "Just sparkling water, please," I said. My mother let out a small, sharp laugh from across the table. She turned to the aunt sitting next to her. "It's for the best, really. Some people just can't handle their spirits. They lose all sense of reality." I felt Leo's hand grip mine under the table. I could feel the heat radiating off him. He was seconds away from saying something that would ruin the night, and I couldn't let him. I squeezed his hand back, a silent plea for him to stay calm. Dinner was a blur of forced smiles and clinking silverware. I focused on my plate, trying to block out the sound of Mark's voice as he told a story to my uncle about some investment he was making. He sounded so confident, so normal. That was the most terrifying part of people like him. They don't look like monsters. They look like your neighbour, your boss, your stepdad. Then came the speeches. My brother's best man went first, a funny, light-hearted tribute. Then Elena's sister. And then it was time for the mother of the groom. My mum stood up, smoothing down her dress. She took the microphone with the grace of a seasoned politician. She started with the usual things. How proud she was of David, how much she loved Elena. But then She took a turn. "Life isn't always easy," she said, her voice dropping into that dramatic, soulful register. "We've had our share of heartaches in this family. We've had people we love lose their way. We've had to deal with lies and accusations that nearly tore us apart." She looked directly at me. The entire room seemed to go still. "But through it all," she continued, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion, "I have stayed strong. I have chosen to keep my heart open. I have chosen to support the people who truly stand by me." She reached down and took Mark's hand. "And I want to thank the man who has been my rock through all the trouble. Mark, thank you for being the father figure this family needed, even when it was difficult." The room applauded. My heart stopped. She had done it. She had used my brother's wedding, the one place I thought I was safe, to publicly canonize my abuser and paint me as the liar once again. She had called him a father figure in front of everyone who knew what I had accused him of. It was a declaration of war. I looked at David. He was staring at his plate, his face pale. He knew. He knew exactly what she was doing. But he was trapped by the "for me" he had asked of me. He couldn't stop her. I felt the room start to spin. The fairy lights became blurry streaks of white. The sound of the applause felt like physical blows against my skin. I needed to leave. I needed to run until I hit the ocean and just keep swimming. But as my mother sat back down, a look of smug triumph on her face, something inside me snapped. It wasn't the kind of snap that leads to a relapse. It was the kind of snap that happens when a person realizes they have nothing left to lose, because everything has already been taken. I didn't leave. I stood up. Leo looked at me, panic in his eyes. "What are you doing?" he whispered. I didn't answer him. I grabbed a spoon from the table and tapped it against my glass of sparkling water. The sound was sharp, cutting through the chatter of the room. My mother looked up, her smile faltering. Mark narrowed his eyes. "I'd like to say a few words," I said, my voice echoing through the microphone that was still live on the stand near our table. The room went silent. This wasn't on the schedule. I wasn't supposed to give a speech. I saw the wedding coordinator at the back of the tent start to move toward me, but David held up a hand, stopping her. He was looking at me, his eyes wide, terrified but curious. I stepped up to the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces, my aunts, my cousins, my brother, the woman who gave birth to me, and the man who had tried to destroy me. "My mother is right," I began, my voice steady, clearer than it had been in years. "Life is about choices. It's about who you choose to believe and who you choose to protect." The silence in that tent wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air right before a massive storm breaks. I could feel every eye in the room on me. I saw my brother's face, pale, tight, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. I saw Elena, her hand over her mouth, looking at me with a mixture of terror and pity. And then there was my mother. She sat there, her wine glass halfway to her lips, her eyes narrowed into slits of pure, venomous ice. She didn't think I'd do it. She thought she'd broken me enough times that I'd just take the hit and keep quiet for the sake of the family image. She was wrong. "My mother just thanked Mark for being a father figure," I said, my voice projecting through the speakers, steady and cold. "And she's right. He taught me a lot. He taught me that some men see a 16-year-old girl as a target. He taught me that fatherly hugs can turn into something that makes you want to scrub your skin until it bleeds. And he taught me that the person who is supposed to be your protector will sometimes choose a stranger's bed over her own daughter's safety." A collective gasp rippled through the tent. It was the sound of 100 people hitting their limit of polite family secrets all at once. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at Mark. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face had gone from smug to a sickly, mottled grey. He looked like a cornered animal looking for an exit that didn't exist. 5 years ago, I continued, I told my mother what happened. I told her the truth. And she told me I was a liar. She told me I was jealous. She watched me spiral into addiction, watched me lose my home, watched me almost lose my life. And she used every bit of that pain as a reason to keep ignoring the truth. She wanted to be a victim so badly that she filed a police report when her own brother slapped her in an argument. Yet she sat next to the man who tried to molest her daughter and called him a rock. I turned my gaze to my mother. She was shaking now, but not with sadness. It was rage, the kind of pure, narcissistic fury that comes when someone finally pulls back the curtain on the monster. I love my brother, I said, looking at David for the first time. And I am so sorry that I had to say this today. But you asked me to stay quiet for 4 days so you could have a perfect wedding. But David, a perfect wedding built on a foundation of lies isn't a beginning. It's a funeral. I spent years being the junkie daughter so that Mum could keep her perfect life. Well, I'm sober now, and I'm done carrying the weight of her choices. I put the microphone back on the stand. The clink of the metal echoed through the speakers, sounding like a gunshot. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then, the explosion happened. My mother didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She stood up so fast her chair flipped over onto the grass. "You ungrateful, selfish bitch!" she screamed. Her voice wasn't the mother of the groom voice anymore. It was raw, ugly, and filled with a lifetime of resentment. "You've always been like this, always trying to ruin things. You're just like your father, a goddamn parasite." "Don't touch her," Leo said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that silenced even her. "We're leaving, and if you or that man ever come near her again, I won't be as polite as she was." The room descended into chaos. My aunts were arguing, my cousins were crying, and in the middle of it all, I saw David. He walked over to Mark, his face a mask of stone. He didn't say a word. He just pointed toward the exit of the tent. Mark tried to speak, tried to do that, "Hey, let's be reasonable" routine. But David didn't move an inch. He just kept pointing. Mark realized then that the father figure act was over. He turned and slunk away into the darkness of the beach, a shadow disappearing into the night. Leo grabbed our bags from the suite. I couldn't even go back in there. And we walked out of that resort. We didn't wait for a shuttle. We didn't wait for an explanation. We just walked until we hit the main road and hailed a taxi. As the car pulled away, I looked back at the lights of the resort. It looked like a palace from a distance, glowing and golden against the black Caribbean Sea. But I knew what was inside. I knew the rot that was finally being scrubbed out. The taxi ride to a different hotel, a cheap, small place 5 miles away that we paid for with the last of our emergency savings, was the first time I felt like I could actually breathe in 5 years. The air was still hot, still humid, but the weight on my chest, it was gone. I checked my phone an hour later. My mother had unblocked me, but only to send a string of texts so vile they didn't even sound human. She blamed me for destroying her life. She told me she never wanted to see me again. She told me I was dead to her. I read them, and for the first time they didn't hurt, because I realized that I had already been dead to her. I had been dead to her the moment I became an inconvenience to her relationship. The only difference was that now, the rest of the world knew why. My brother texted me shortly after. It was just one sentence. "I'm sorry I asked you to be quiet. Go home. I'll call you when the dust settles." It wasn't a perfect ending. David's wedding was forever marked by that night. My family was fractured in a way that might never be repaired. But as I sat on a plastic chair on the balcony of that cheap motel, watching the sun start to rise again, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone to save me. I wasn't waiting for my mother to believe me. I believed me. And that was enough. I'm back home now, living with my cousins. My mother hasn't reached out since that night in Cancun, and honestly, I hope she never does. Mark is still with her, apparently, but they've been alienated from a lot of the family who finally saw the truth for what it was. I'm still sober, I'm still working, I'm still painting, but no Playboy bunnies this time, just landscapes, big open spaces where there's nowhere for anyone to hide. I asked her one question, and it ended my relationship with my mother. But looking back, it didn't break our family. It just finally let the light into a room that had been dark for way too long. So, I have to ask you guys, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet for the sake of the wedding, or would you have spoken up like I did? Sometimes the price of peace is just too high, isn't it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you've ever dealt with someone who chose a partner over their own child, I'd love to hear how you handled it. And if you want to hear more stories about finding the strength to speak your truth,